This is Joseph Stalin. His quote was, "A single death is a tragedy, but a million deaths is a statistic." Stalin had people arrested in the night and put before spectacular show trials, where what they did back then in like the 1400s is they would put people to death by beheading them. Stalin showed many strategic movements by offing people to gain power. So he started to seize land from peasants and organizing collective farms. Millions were killed in forced labor or starved during the ensuing famine. He signed a non-aggression pact with Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. He demanded the Allies open a second front against Germany. They agreed to in the spring of 1944. In February 1945, three leaders met again with Soviet troops taking over countries. Stalin was in strong position. He agreed to enter the war against Japan once Germany was defeated. Roosevelt died that April and was replaced by President Harry S. Truman. In 1948, Stalin ordered an economic blockade on the German city of Berlin in hopes of gaining full control of the city. He did not expect that the United States forces under Harry S. Truman would take control and send food and water over the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall blockaded the East and West Berlin. Many families were stuck on other sides of the wall. This destroyed hopes and dreams of many families. The death and legacy Stalin. Stalin's health started to deteriorate in the 1950s. After an assassination plot was uncovered, he ordered the head of the secret police to instigate a new purge of the Communist Party. Before he was executed, Stalin died on March 5, 1953. He left a legacy of death and terror as he returned a backward Russia into a strong and scary country. Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev was born in 1894. He led the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, serving as the premier from 1958 to 1964. He instigated the Cuban Missile Crisis by placing nuclear weapons 90 miles from Florida. He initiated a process of de-Stalinization that made Soviet society less repressive. Nikita could be authoritarian in his own right, crushing a revolt in Hungary, and approved the construction of the Berlin Wall. He was born in a small Russian village near the Ukrainian border. At age 14, he moved with his family to the Ukrainian mining town of Yotzbeka, where he worked under as a metal worker and performed other odd jobs. Despite the religious upbringing, Nikita joined the Communist Bolsheviks in 1918, more than a year after they had seized power in the Russian Revolution. His first wife died and they had 2 children. He remarried and had 4 more children. In 1929, he moved to Moscow, where he rose through the Communist Party ranks. Millions of people were killed or imprisoned in Gulag labor camps, and millions more died in famines brought on by the forced collectivization of agriculture. During World War II, Nikita Khrushchev mobilized troops to fight Nazi Germany and the Ukraine and at Stalingrad. After the war, he helped to rebuild the devastated countryside. By the time Stalin died in March in March 1953, Nikita had positioned himself as a possible successor. 6 months later, he became head of the Communist Party and one of the most powerful people in the USSR. Nikita gave a speech in February 1956 that criticized Stalin for arresting and deporting opponents. This gave higher leadership. Starting in 1957, Khrushchev made some minor attempts to rehabilitate Stalin's image, but he switched course once again in 1961, when the city of Stalingrad was renamed and Stalin's remains were removed from Moscow's Red Scare. Emboldened by Nikita's so-called secret speech, protesters took to streets in the Soviet satellites of Poland and Hungary. The Polish revolted, and this ended in violence. At least 2,500 Hungarians were killed in late 1956, and about 13,000 were wounded. Many fled to the west, and many more were arrested or deported. 2 years later, a Soviet rocket hit the moon, and in 1961, Soviet Yuri A. Gagarin became the first man in space. The break with China and food shortages in the USSR started to have major downfalls in Khrushchev's legitimacy in the eyes of other high-ranking Soviet officials. In October 1964, Khrushchev was called back from a vacation in Georgia and forced to resign as both premier and head of the Communist Party. He died of a heart attack in September 1971. This is Khrushchev and Stalin. Harry S. Truman. Truman was born in Lamar, Missouri in 1884. He grew up in Independence and for 12 years prospered as a Missouri farmer. He went on to France during World War I as a captain in the field artillery. Returning, he married Elizabeth Wallace and opened a haberdashery in Kansas City. He became active in the Democratic Party. Truman was elected a judge position of the Jackson County Court in 1922. He became a senator in 1934 during World War II. He headed the Senate War Investigating Committee, checking into waste and corruption and saving $15 billion. During his few weeks as vice president, Harry S. Truman scarcely saw President Roosevelt and received no briefing on the development of the atomic bomb or the unfolding difficulties that formed with Soviet Russia. This is Harry S. Truman. and he's also on the right, and this is the American Expeditionary Forces. This was his identity card. It gave his name and then his rank, and he was captain of 129 FA. So he became president on April 12, 1945. He told reporters, "I felt like the moon, the stars, and all the planets had fallen on me." As president, Truman made many crucial decisions that would come to affect history. Soon after V-Day, the war against Japan had reached its final stage. A plea for Japan to surrender was rejected. Truman ordered atomic bombs dropped on cities devoted to war work. Any city that was devoted to the war, Harry S. Truman saw as a target to put on their back. So the two biggest cities that Harry S. Truman sent atomic bombs to was the city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were two Japan cities, and they didn't use just one plane. They used many different planes to drop their atomic bombs on. Right after they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japanese surrendered quickly after this. In June 1945, Truman witnessed the signing of the Charter of the United Nations to hopefully fulfill peace between everyone. He presented to Congress a 21-point program proposing expansion of Social Security to fulfill an employment program, a Permanent Fair Employment Practices Act, and public housing and slum clearance. The program, Truman wrote, symbolizes for himself my assumption of the office of president in my own right. It became known as the Fair Deal. When the Russians blockaded the western sectors of Berlin in 1948, Truman created a massive airlift to supply Berliners until the Russians backed down. He negotiated a military alliance to protect Western nations, the North Atlantic Treaty of Organization, which was established in 1949. In June of 1950, when the Communist government of North Korea attacked South Korea, Truman interfered promptly with his military advisors. He wrote, complete, almost unspoken acceptance on the part of everyone that whatever had to be done to meet this aggression had to be done. There was no suggestion from anyone that either United Nations or the United States could back away from it. A very long and discouraging struggle ensured that the United Nations forces held a line above the old boundary of South Korea. Truman decided not to run for president again. So he retired his independence at age 88. He died December 26, 1972, after he fought for his life.